Hi everybody and welcome. Welcome to Gravel Union Talks, a podcast series full of inspiring stories, news and events from the world of gravel. Each month we will be talking with guests who are passionate about riding off the beaten track, adventure riding, bikepacking and gravel racing. I'm your host Carlo, and behind the microphone in Newcastle, preparing for a major trip, is Olly. Olly, tell us about your trip.
Actually, I'll tell you about it properly in a minute, but in 4 days, I'm jetting off to Nepal, and I've got so much I still need to do. So it's quite exciting, but it's also quite terrifying.
We'll we'll get back to that a little later, because you will also get us into the details of high mountain gravel riding a little bit more, because there's an article on it. But on our guest. In the 27 previous episodes that we've recorded of the Gravel Union Talks podcast, 27 already, Olly.
And now it's crazy, isn't it?
We've chatted with guests who have done some pretty amazing things on a bike. But our guest today should probably win an award for having ridden the furthest. Markus Stitz launched himself into the cycling world after spending nearly 12 months in 2015 and 2016, becoming the first person to ever ride around the world on a single speed bike. I repeat, around the world on a single speed bike. Okay, does it get any crazier, you think? Since then, he has become better known as a guidebook author, filmmaker, gravel event organizer, public speaker, and passionate advocate for all things Scottish. So our main guest will be after the bumper, of course, but first, we talk a little bit more about the website, what's going on, and what's your theme of this episode, Olly?
I figured that adventure was appropriate for this month, bearing in mind we're talking to Markus, who personifies adventure because he spends a lot of his time doing something pretty cool. So I found 3 good stories that we've published in the last month or so that are a good fit. The first one's going to be called, it's all about riding in Kenya, a bikepacking trip in Kenya, and it's called Caribou Kenya, which means welcome to Kenya in Swahili. It's written by a guy called Julian Velasco, who sent in, this is his 3rd story that we've published. Mm-hmm. He did one in Morocco, one in, I can't remember, but another amazing bikepacking story somewhere in the Middle East, and then this one. And it's brilliant. Each time he goes, he has quite a stressful job. He works for a company organising multi-day mountain bike races. And so to get some time off from that, he goes with a friend and does some bikepacking somewhere incredible.
Some
and this
bikepacking.
Time was Kenya.
Some bikepacking.
Bikepacking. I know each of his adventures have been pretty big, but he sent in another one, and it's super good. Really great photographs, and it gives you a good insight into why you should consider Kenya as a destination.
Yeah, so this is all about, some big adventures, because we go from Africa to the tip of South America.
Yeah.
In just one leap.
I know, we're skipping around the world a bit this time, and this is a race that is literally the end of the world in South America, and it's called Caraquinca Gravel. And it's a story. It's a bikepacking event. It's a slightly strange one because it's an out and back route because there just isn't enough gravel roads there to make it into a circuit. And Spanish contributor George, who's written tons and tons of brilliant stories for us and has ridden all over the world as well. He got a place to take part and sent in a story about what it's like to ride in Patagonia and literally go to the end of the world.
There were also some pros actually present.
Yeah, that's it. Two pros who are going to retire at the end of last year. They took part in this for fun, but obviously because they're pros, they were ridiculously strong. And I think they sat on the front and took all the headwinds and helped tow the group along.
Yeah, Jetse Bol and Robert Keesing, pretty strong riders.
Yeah, super strong.
So at the end of their I saw on the photographs that they were wearing their jersey because they were still under contract, but it was like the last days of their contract.
It's a great way to finish.
And then the last article that we highlighted today is you've written it, and it's
this
about
one's one of mine.
Yeah,
and it's all to do with my trip to Nepal. So I'm going to go and take part in a thing called the Trans Nepal, which is the first time it's run, and it's a gravel event that starts in the very north of Nepal on the Tibetan border, and then goes through the whole country north to south and finishes on the Indian border. But it starts at nearly 5,000 meters, or it's pretty wild. It takes 4 days to get there just from Kathmandu. You do a whole day drive, then a short flight into the mountains, and then 3 more days of traveling just to get to the start line. So it really is remote. And I've been very lucky. I've traveled quite a bit before at altitude. I've ridden 4 or 5 times above 5,000 meters. I've been to some pretty cold places. I've been to some pretty wild places. So I wrote a story all about what you should consider if you're going to go and do. Obviously, not many people are going to get the chance to do this, but no matter where you go that's wild and remote, you need to think about similar kind of things. So it was some advice on what to pack, what to think about, how to prepare, what kind of bike to take, all those kind of, and make it as practical as possible. But for me, it was based on going to Nepal.
Yeah, because you really need to have a plan if you go to that altitude.
Yeah, but partly for the cold, because the weather forecast at the minute, it's going to be -20 overnight when we're there, which is very, very, very cold. So
Okay.
Choosing what to pack is quite a struggle.
I have less adventure, but better weather probably, because I will be heading over to the south of Spain in March. But you're going in February already.
Yeah.
So
by the time this podcast is published, I should be hopefully safely in the Himalayas.
Yeah, hope so. Obviously we'll keep track of you. I think we'll just head over to our main guest of today, Markus Stitz. There we go.
Great, well, welcome to this month's podcast, and we've got a special guest all the way from the snowy north, and we're going to be talking to Markus Stitz, who's known as a bike packer, a route planner, an author, a filmmaker, an explorer, I guess. I mean, the list of accolades just goes on and on. So, Markus, thanks for joining us.
I'm sorry about to interrupt you here, Olly, but I think this is we have multi-talents earlier in our podcast, but this one beats it all, right?
He does, yeah.
So I'm curious, Markus. Please introduce yourself and try to highlight all the things that you do.
Quite a long list.
It's a long list. I think I always I like to refer myself I'm just a passionate cyclist. I think most of the times, and all of the other things kind of derive from that passion. But I'm also, I think, interested in arts and culture and history. So I think all of that weaves in. And yeah, I love cycling, and I'm also super proud that I managed to make a living out of my passion.
Yeah. Well, we should start first of all, Markus, by asking where you are, because you're obviously it's a podcast, so our audience can't see you, but you're sitting there wearing a very warm-looking jumper and a woolly hat. So presumably you're somewhere cold.
Yeah, so I'm in southern Norway at the moment, close to Oslo, and preparing for a winter cargo bike trip here. Spent the last month getting, I think, everything ready for the trip in small steps. It's something I always wanted to do, but I think winter cycling is possibly the most, you need to be prepared, I think, full stop. So I kind of in the last couple of weeks put everything in place to head out there with the right mindset and have the bike ready as well. And enjoying winter as well. I normally live in Scotland, and we do get snow in Scotland, but not as much as here. So at the moment it's just nice to have something different.
Great. We're very jealous. I don't know, Carlo, whether you have any snow. We had a little tiny bit in Newcastle last weekend, and it's cold. It was -10 here this morning, but it's not Norwegian cold by any stretch.
We had snow for like 5 minutes in the Netherlands, and then it was all gone again. So it's chilly, but it's not as cold as it is up north. Yeah. And you're a little bit more up north than I am, Olly, but Markus definitely is a little bit more even up north. So it's winter cycling is preparation. We did some podcasts on winter cycling as well. So
we did indeed. Well, we'll come back to your snow adventures later on, Markus. But we're going to start first of all by you were born in Germany, but you live in Scotland, and I think to many people they know you as Mr. Scotland now because of your passion for where you live. So the question as a Brit, why the hell do you want to come to the UK to live, and particularly why would you move to Scotland? And I'm allowed to say that because I'm a Brit. So.
Yes. Yeah, really. I think Well, I came to Scotland. I actually came to Scotland because I studied in Sunderland, which is close to Newcastle. So
Yeah,
you
very
know
close.
pretty well where it is. And I think I always had a passion for the outdoors, and Germany has some great outdoors as well. But it's always been a country with I think it's 84 million people now. So a
Okay.
lot of people on a very small space. So and Scotland's very different. I think Scotland and Norway are the opposite. You've got 5 million people on a very large piece of land, and that's kind of always excited me. And the same, I had a quick stopover in New Zealand for 2 years before I came to Scotland, and I guess the difference between New Zealand and Scotland is just Scotland's closer to my family, so I think Scotland's really well suited because it's got all of the stuff I value about being outdoors, but at the same time I don't feel like I'm on the other side of the world and totally removed from the people, my family and friends I grew up with in Germany. And it's also, I do think that I think the UK is a very friendly country. Like I do really value the friendliness of the people in Scotland, and I've never there wasn't never a single time when I felt like I don't belong here, like I'm an incoming person. That was never the case, and I guess like in a certain sense it was also a bit of an, I would call it, accident in inverted commas. It kind of meant I I arrived in Edinburgh, and I to be honest with you, I never had the plan to stay for that long, but it just happened, and I'm still there, and I'm enjoying it, and just love it.
Great. I mean, it is a great country. I was being harsh on it before, and I can certainly see why you would choose it. Now, if we look back at your career, you've had an incredibly varied life so far, and it hasn't just been about bikes. So, for example, you've been a DJ, you ran a music festival, you've worked in a marketing company, you're an author, you're a filmmaker, and you organise a series of gravel events, amongst a variety of other things as well. What's the common thread between all of those?
I was thinking about that actually, because I think I think for me the personal conclusion was there's a certain can-do attitude. So the one thing I don't like is when people say, "Oh, it's just not the right thing and nothing's offered and whatever." I think if you look at all the stuff, and I think also I think I went into all of those things, being at the music festival or DJing, with being passionate about it, but also clinging on to it. I think I think it's quite a simple human thing. You see something new, you get excited about it. It might be trendy, it might be hip, and then at some stage you fall out of love with it because something else is coming across. And I think in a certain sense that happened to a few things I've done in my life, but like the music and the organizing thing, and now the cycling, that kind of stayed on. And I think over the years I had the energy to kind of hang on to it. And the other thing, I think I'm generally interested in people. I think I generally like meeting new people, going to new places. I'm not opposed to change at all. Again, this is something totally human. I think we are creatures of comfort. There's no, like, especially like if you look at how we have evolved over the last years, or centuries, thousands of years as well. And I think I do like to challenge myself every now and then, to kind of try something new. But at the same time, if you look at all of the things, they kind of fit in quite well together. So the DJing, when I started off DJing, that's giving me an intro into the arts world, and then I went on from working in theatre and arts festivals. So there was kind of a thing. And then what I did before I went into sports a bit more is, like, I still remember when I had my job interview at Scottish Swimming, they were looking at me as kind of, "You've got no idea about swimming, you're not a good swimmer, what are you doing here?" And I thought, like, well, I've worked in the arts for a long time, so what I've learned over those years working there, I can make something with very little money. So like by being creative, by knowing the right people, So that was really good to then go into the world of Scottish swimming, and then afterwards deciding to cycle around the world. And then I basically took all of those experiences and bundled them into creating or starting Bikepacking Scotland, and again doing something. I think I had a vision of what I wanted to do, but I think every time with all of those things, correcting course along the way, things are changing so rapidly along the way. So you can't sit somewhere and do the same thing for 5 years. It's just not gonna work.
Okay.
But do you also think that's
adapting to your environment?
do you also think that's a sign of this time, that everything is much more organic than it used to be with corporates? You're in Norway, Newcastle. I'm in the Netherlands. That we do this interview. Everything's changed over the last 10 years quite rapidly. It allows people to do, to be creative, but also to enjoy your freedom more.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is like there are always good and bad bits about it. But like I think one thing I think which is worthwhile mentioning is, and this is something I experienced when I cycled around the world, and for that alone the trip was such a good experience. I do honestly think that, like, on the larger scale, the world is a place of good. There, like, most of the people you meet, they want something. They want to help other people. They want to work with other people. They want to have a fulfilled life. Of course there's the odd Betty in there, but if you look at the percentage of that, it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. And so I think if you look at the last 10 years or even 20 years, we've become really well connected, and that, for me, that's a positive thing. And at the same time, I think there's also, there's the danger in that, like, things are, your attention, focus on something, gets ever more distracted all the time. That's just what comes with those complex things at the same time. That's never been any different beforehand. And all of this is accelerating as well. So not being opposed to change is a good trait to have.
Okay.
I've got to learn all the time, and then especially since running a business, no year is the same. Like, there's clients come from various different directions, and especially last year I kind of like changed course for Bikepacking Scotland as well. So that's the thing, but that's one thing that excites me. And it's also like with the bike trips, I love, the winter trip here in Norway. It's not a piece of cake, and I also do know that this is something people would possibly be more inclined to go on a more easy cycle in the warmth somewhere. But I love a little bit of a challenge, if it's in good measure, and that helps professionally as well.
I think that's understating it, Marcus. I love
that,
I love a bit of a challenge. Before we go over to, like, what's really, and what's great in this new world, this digital world, is that you can inspire people by doing your adventure, being on your own, but also giving it on several platforms to, like, even thousands, 10,000, 100,000 of people. But before we head over to your trip around the world, which it sounds easy, but like 34,000 kilometers of riding. Okay, but how did you get into cycling? Because you just mentioned that you're from the arts world, went into swimming through in Scotland. But how did you get in touch with cycling?
So I was a very reluctant learner as a child, actually. So, like, I think my path into cycling has possibly been very different to what you would normally look at. So cycling didn't really play any role until I was 18. I could cycle. I was a child growing up in Germany. So, like, even if you're reluctant, you kind of have to learn to cycle, because otherwise you're the very odd one out. But exercise never played a big role in my life up until then. And then I studied in a town called Ilmenau, which is in the Thuringian forest. It's also well known for cross-country skiing and various winter sports. And for me, it's just kind of like I was in this amazing natural place with not too much, like, the cultural scene over there and things to do. It's a small town, hidden away in a forest. It's not, there's only so much you can do. So I kind of switched on and kind of thought like, I'm here, I should make something out of it. And that's when I started exercise, started running. And then after a year doing a marathon, and then after a year kind of switched to cycling, and kind of that from that time onwards, it basically stayed as like a red line to my life. And then I guess the good thing about coming to it on such a late stage in my life, well, it's not late stage in my life, I'm in my 40s now, so that's possibly much later. But I think one thing I experienced when I worked in swimming, I think there's a thing that a lot of people do something as a child, and then like halfway through they fall out of love with it and they do something else. Like I've worked with so many really, really good swimmers who've won medals, and as soon as they stopped like training properly, that was it. I think they possibly never been to the pool afterwards. And I never had that. For me, cycling came at a stage in my life when I actually actively chose to do that. And then I guess, I think in a way, I always, like, for me, cycling, as it is such a nice thing to get in touch with people. So two things I love about cycling is by talking about cycling in whatever shape and form, you've got like-minded people, you've got something to talk about. It's never a dull conversation. But at the same time, is also, I do think, and this is something which I think kind of goes through my life as well. It's given me so many benefits, mental. I'm still fit. Hopefully that's never going to change. And that was the initial reason. The initial reason why I did exercise, because I was totally unfit. I had a couple of health problems, and the doctor literally said to me, "Look, you've got two choices. You can do something about this, or you just keep on doing the same thing, and later in your life you're going to have some problems along the line." And I chose to change and do something different, and never looked back anytime since. And there's always periods where you've thought do more and do less, but I always try to do at least as much as needed to keep to a good level and kind of continue that. And so I think cycling for me is become much more than just an activity. It's giving me, it's been a good thing to have in my life. And this is why I'm also really passionate about getting other people into cycling. And that doesn't have to be ultra cycling. It doesn't have to, there's absolutely no need for people to be able to cycle 150, 500 kilometers a day. If they do 10, actually that is so important. That step between 0 and 10 is much more important than the step between 10 and 150 or 500.
For your general fitness, of course, yeah, sure. It's all about lifestyle. So I think hopefully our audience, Olly, is into that lifestyle.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that the red thread in the gravel uni community is out there and admiringly looking at the distances some ride, but more like everybody's is at their own level, and that's what I like about the gravel community. Is that everybody fits in there. If you're a racer, or if you're a long distance rider, or if you just do your daily cycle of only 10K, then all's good. Over to the world trip. Maybe you can picture our listeners what you actually rode. The impact, 34,000 kilometers. Take us along your global ride.
And also tell us why did you choose to do it on a single speed? Because that's probably the bit
on a
that's
single
more
speed.
Unusual.
So I think let's start with the easy question. That's why single speed. Like I do, and I think this picks up on what I've just said about cycling. I think cycling, in order to make it attractive for more people, it needs to be we need to keep at least part of it simple. This is the kind of thing, and this is what I love about cycling. It's such a simple activity. Running is possibly more simple than that because you just need a pair of trainers. But right after that, cycling comes. And it's also different to swimming, because in order to go swimming, you at least need some body of water, and sometimes that doesn't exist. So simplicity and also challenge. I think there's a kind of thing where I think I looked at the records and I couldn't find anyone who had cycled around the world on a single speed bike, at least hadn't done like a full lap of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Full lap of the world is, I didn't go by Guinness record, so I didn't stick to that because I had no intention breaking a record or setting a record. But so that was the kind of thing, and the ride itself. You know what? This is also, it is about simplicity. So I handed in my notice in March, and then I had about a couple of months I had 3 months notice period. So that kind of set me to, I couldn't leave before June. But then I also designed the Capital Trail during that time. So I wanted to design my first bikepacking route, because I had in mind already this is something I could potentially be doing when I come back. And then I thought, like, you know what, I can spend the summer in the UK. It's the nicest time of the year to spend in the UK, and then set off in September. And that was my timeline. There was no science to it. There was nothing sophisticated about it. And then what I realized by setting off in September, I can't really go with the classic round the world routes that loads of people take by heading to Europe, then heading into Asia and doing it this way around. So I thought, like, well, I'm just going to look at the season and kind of look at what is potentially be doable to cycle, and go by that. And that was my plan. Nothing difficult. So I cycled through the UK, cycled through France, and then the initial plan was to hit to Lisbon and go from Lisbon to Reykjavik, have a quick stop over in Iceland, and then head over to New York. But when I cycled the south of France, I got a little bit bored by cycling on plains with a single speed bike, because that is the most challenging thing. Going up mountains is brilliant on the bike because you get a reasonable speed and you can roll down the hills on the other side. So you're not really disadvantaged to any normal bike riders. But if you're on a flat, straight road, that's where you realize you're on a single speed. So I changed my plan and went to Barcelona instead, went over the Pyrenees, and then flew from Barcelona to Reykjavik and then on to New York. And then I hit New York in October, which was beautiful. Such a nice season to be in the US. And then went from New York basically all the way across to the west. Again, like, I'm kind of made up the route while I was going. And then I had to break the trip in November because my dad had an accident on his bike. So I went back to Germany. He was in intensive care for a month, and spent a month in Germany to support my family. He sadly died, but I went back after that, just before Christmas, and then cycled the last of the trip to Santa Monica and up to San Francisco. And I hit San Francisco by New Year's Eve in 2015. And then from San Francisco to New Zealand, I flew into Auckland and then cycled from Auckland all across New Zealand from north to south. So from Auckland all the way down to Bluff, and then I did a little bit of a detour because there's a town called Dunedin, and Dunedin is the old name for Edinburgh. And I thought, like, that's just a nice twist to cycle from Edinburgh to Dunedin and all the way back. Dunedin is also like Edinburgh. Like, even if you come there in the peak of summer, which I was in New Zealand, it's 9 degrees and it's blowing holy. It's very Scottish. It's very nice, I think it's nice to have some familiar things on a trip like this. And then I went over to Sydney, cycled all across the Australia. There was possibly the toughest challenge, cycling across the Nullarbor on a single speed, because again, it's a kind of relatively flat road, and you can only go so fast. And then I flew from Perth to Singapore, and then from Singapore's not really big. It's not the greatest place for cycling either, but I had a mate staying there, so it was kind of good to spend a few days like acclimatizing for Asia. And then went all across Malaysia, Thailand, Laos and Vietnam, and then from Vietnam, from Hanoi to Tehran, and then Tehran I met up with my brother in May. I cycled a few weeks with him through Iran and into Turkey, and then made my way all the way back over land from Turkey to Germany. And I'd always given myself like a year as a time frame, because this is, I think, in a way, like, for me for me, this wasn't about like a total lifestyle choice and kind of then being a nomad afterwards. That was never the intention, and I also didn't end up like this. But I had a few weeks left, and I thought like I might as well make the most of it. And so instead of going the straight way back to Scotland, I went over Ireland, Northern Ireland, into Scotland, and yeah, it's a nice route. Very different countries, and possibly I guess again I haven't looked at Mark's or Jenny's routes, but I do think I beat them by the altitude and the meters climbed along the journey. I basically tried to find the hilliest route I could find wherever I went, because that's fun on a single speed.
If we had to ask you to pick one highlight and one low point of your journey, is that possible, or is it just too many in such a big trip?
It's possible. I mean, this is a very common question you get asked
Okay.
most of the time. So
you've had plenty of time to think about it.
yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, my highlight still is, and it has been at that time, was Iran, because it is such a different country. There's no tourism there. You need to carry piles of cash with you because there's no card machines. So it doesn't have any of the conveniences you got in the Western world, but the people are super welcoming. And I stand by this. Like, I had so many nice experiences in Iran, and it kind of refers back to what I've said before. And I do think in general the world is a good place. You know, I came into Iran being a bit just ambivalent about things potentially. You know, like I heard really good experiences from people who'd been to Iran, but then also you look at the news coverage and you kind of look at it and you kind of go like, you must be mad to cycle there.
Yeah.
And it's totally different on the ground. Like, people are welcoming. I got stopped by the police once for drinking coffee and practicing the English, and that was about it. Nothing happened. It was unspectacular from that point of view. It's just a nice ride with very welcoming people. And low points, tricky. That's a more tricky one to say, to be honest with you. Yeah, I did not appreciate being clipped by a car in Bulgaria with a ring mirror. That was the only, but then back again, looking back on this is the only thing that really happened. I might have possibly blacked out some of close passes along the way, you know, because that's the other thing as well. Like, I think the one thing you need to leave at home is fear, because as soon as you fear something, you make stupid choices, and you act very irrational. So it's the kind of thing that just. There was a bit of a low point, because it was also at the time in the journey where I felt like, is this necessary now? You know, do you have to do this, or have you done enough of the journey to kind of say, I've done it? I kind of set out what I wanted to do, but then again, it'd be unfair to say Bulgaria is not a welcoming country, because I had similar experiences. I still know sitting in a bakery in Bulgaria and people was as welcoming as in other country.
Yeah. And everywhere you go, you're gonna, as you said before, you get a couple of bad cherries, but most people are decent. When you get crappy drivers everywhere, don't you? It's not a Bulgarian thing.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a bit. So we introduced you as being Mr. Scotland, but you haven't just worked in Scotland, and recently you've been branching out. You've got into book publishing since 2020 onwards, and you first of all you worked on the Great British Gravel Rides guidebook. Then you did your own guidebook about gravel riding in Scotland, but you've also worked with Yorkshire producing a thing called the Route YC, which I had the pleasure of joining you for a bit of that last year, I guess, wasn't it? Yeah, last year. This time last year, perhaps February.
Yeah, it was around about this time. Yeah.
And then you've worked in Quebec, and at the minute you're in Norway. So you're obviously starting to branch out. So how do you decide which bits of the world that you want to focus on next, and also are you allowed to tell us about where you're going after Norway?
I think the decision it's just I think it often comes by a number of events that kind of happen to I think generally I'm interested in places which are not on the radar of people to cycle in. You know, you could possibly argue now that Scotland is well advanced in that scale, because it has become a place who has become in the last decade pretty popular for cycling. and all the other places. So my connection to Quebec is my girlfriend's from Gaspé, a small town in Quebec. So that made sense at some stage to kind of spend a bit more time over there. And Louise is also the reason why I'm in Norway, because she teaches at university here, so I spent an increasing amount of time over here. But I think what all of those places have in common is they are again, like, I think they're places where you still got nature in a very raw form. It's just kind of like I'm always careful with saying that, because if you look at a country like Scotland, for example, it is actually totally shaped by humans. If you go to the islands, they look the way they look because we've got rid of all the trees.
Yeah.
over. So I think it's not untouched nature. I think that claim doesn't apply. And even it's the same in Quebec. There's reasons in Quebec, but I think that element of something new, and I love the challenge of going to places which you wouldn't necessarily choose if you look at I don't know, articles or whatever where people go riding. That's the one thing that fascinates me, because what always comes with that is that people are open. I do think people are a bit more open-minded to new ideas. They kind of, if something's really well established, then there isn't often space to do something new. People are more inclined to kind of, the argument you always get back, and this doesn't apply to tourism or cycling exclusively, it applies to everything in life. If something's working, why should we change? Why do we need to do something differently? So I think going into destinations like this, where I personally think there is potential, makes perfect sense and interests me. So I think at the moment, and I guess over the years what I've done in Scotland, I think with some concessions has worked. I think one thing, when I started bikepacking Scotland, I ran against a lot of closed doors, because it was literally people saying, why should we care about cycling? Like, why? What's the benefit? And it's really hard to find answers to that, to be honest with you. But what has changed over the last 5 years is, I think there is now an understanding that tourism has to change. We can't just throw a bucket or like plane loads of people into a beauty spot and expect the locals to be happy about that. And it just doesn't work. And so I think for me, and this is essentially where the potential for cycling does lie. I think with cycling we can get people to experience a country at their own pace. So they're much more independent. They also leave very little impact. There is still an impact in some shape or form, but by someone cycling through the landscape, there's not much that happens to those. So so I think if you look at how tourism impacts certain regions, I think cycling is a really good form of doing that. And at the same time, I also think it kind of transforms people in a way. This is the thing I've kind of like got a little bit, for me, I always have to remind myself when I do a trip in those beautiful places, it's a privilege to do that. And I'm not a big fan of the saying it's a trip of a lifetime. Like, I just don't think there is such a thing, because you evolve and you do different things. But I do think there are, what I see from experience that people had doing bikepacking, doing gravel riding, it does pull a trigger in them, and often is a catalyst for positive change. And that's, I think this is for me, that's super important. If I can kind of look at those places which interest me, and other people can go there and ride as well, and have the same, they don't have the same experience, but possibly similar experiences. That's a cool thing. So I'm trying to focus. I focused less on Scotland last year, done Route Sea. And Route Sea, I think, is a bit of a special project within that portfolio as well, because it was basically showing to a tourism body that cycling can be very, very positive to market a region. two people. So Wood by Sea started basically in the same thing as the North Coast 500 started, and I don't think we need to have a discussion about the good and bad of those driving routes.
I guess just to explain to our audience that don't know, both of them were set up as driving routes, weren't they? And they were aimed at people in camper vans or kind of traditional touring holidays, but all vehicle based.
Yeah, and the North Coast 500 has become, it's kind of run its own course, and this is the thing. I think this is the thing. If things become successful, I think to a certain extent we also lose control over them. I think this is something people just have to accept. It's the same with social media. You know, I think there's a point in the journey where you no longer can control those things. And basically the challenge for Wood by Sea is they came to me and said, look, how can we get more cyclists getting cycling here instead of it didn't take off in the way they expected it to take off as a driving route. And I think that is mainly due to the fact that there is a lot of traffic in that part of the UK already.
Yeah.
You know, I think your experience driving it on some roads is fine, but on some roads I would just I don't see. For me, it's not a holiday being sat in stationary traffic somewhere looking at someone else's number plate. I just don't think that's relaxing. Mm-hmm. So I kind of looked at it and I say, look, there is a real potential for cycling here. And if we can make it happen, we make it happen. And I think one thing that project has proven that you can actually in the end of the day, it wasn't too much about the cycling. It was putting a region in the UK on the map, which I think is stunningly beautiful, but often gets overlooked. But then also at the same time giving people the means with itineraries and those routes to kind of say, look, if you want to explore off the beaten track and don't want to be stuck in traffic all the time, here's a way to do it. And yeah, that's a good thing. And I think this is what comes with writing guidebooks. I think there's always two sides of the story. There's the one side is that you actually make places known to other people. And there's a huge responsibility with that, because I mentioned that beforehand, if it becomes popular, then you might take away from that spot. I don't think anyone enjoys being stuck with 500 people on a cliff somewhere where everyone takes the same selfie. Don't think, so that's the responsibility. At the same time, I also do think if we want to get more people into cycling, we need to make it easy. And one thing the car industry has proven over many decades, they've made it easy for people to drive. They made it easy to choose the car over any other transport means. And that's just what happens. And I don't think the solution to that is to condemn that. The solution, I think to a certain extent, kind of looking at what have they done to make it convenient and how can we do that for cycling? I think I generally think if we want to get more people cycling, we need to offer them a choice that they can pick up. And I think Carlo is based in the Netherlands. You've got a totally different infrastructure and you're making it easy for people to cycling. And you can see, you just have to look at the numbers, they're there. And with the tourism, with those destinations, and I have to wind this up. So basically what I like doing is to kind of say, look, you can go to those places. And if you haven't got all of the experience I've accumulated over 15 years, kind of in a way solely focusing on my cycling activity, you can have some of that experience in form of an itinerary or journey or film or article I've written, and hopefully that is enough to kind of create your own experience, but take away the fear, that initial barrier to do something. And that's in a sense, that's what Bikepacking Scotland has always been about.
But is it not only like your Bikepacking Scotland project, but also the other work that you do is handing people tools, to get them over the threshold to actually go out there? And, it's like you set out guidelines. And we know also from our platform that some people need more Well, encouragement and just the little help that they can get, and even if it's we talked about the smallest adventures, it's an adventure. So I
Yeah.
think that really helps. Um, in during the last what is it 40 minutes, I hear also sustainability is one of your goals.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, how do you position yourself, because you're always, I'm listening to you, that you're always trying to balance, like, okay, we want to make things popular, but it doesn't need to be too popular. We need to get people out of the car onto the bike. How
Hmm.
what role does that play in your work?
It's hugely important, but I'm also well aware of the fact that I have flown all around the world.
Yeah.
And this is not going to go away. So I think sustainability, what I don't want to do is to install a certain guilt in people about not doing something. I think it's about encouraging, like as you said before, and giving them the tools to make more informed choices. And I guess what I try to do, and then this is where the bicycle is such a great vehicle. I think this goes it because it comes in so many shades of forms, and especially with e-bikes now coming, like being. I think we're there with e-bikes. We don't have to talk about e-bikes any longer, saying they're a new thing. They are not. They're just they are there, and let's use them and let's use them to encourage people to do more. I think what I always try and but I'm also like, I think sustainability is a word that's often used as a buzzword, and I think it's often used in a totally wrong way. I think we cannot talk about sustainability if we, in order to get more people into cycling, then we produce a cycling film which requires 4 vehicles to go up and down the country road.
True.
That is okay, that is okay, but let's not call this sustainable. This is not sustainable. It is something else, whatever. So I'm kind of like trying to, I think I try to make choices. I try to make good choices, but I also don't think I think what is really important for sustainability is to change people's habits. That is so much more important than anything else, because if you just do something to tick a box, you do that once, twice, or 3 times, and at some stage in the journey you swing back into your old habits. So I think for me, everything I'm trying to do is to kind of really, and that can be large or small changes in people's habits, and what you often find, so Norway is a good example actually for this. Actually, if you pick up the bike when it's snowing here, you're possibly quicker than being in a car. Because they clear the cycle paths first and then clear the roads.
Okay.
And also, if you pick up your bike, you don't have to scrape your windscreen, you don't have to heat up your car, etc., etc. But and it's a small thing, and I do think like sustainability and all of those habit choices, people make changes to their habits because they want to improve something. I've yet to know. I haven't met a single human being who's kind of deliberately saying, yeah, I kind of make cuts in my life and I live in a different way and I get rid of. That doesn't work. I just don't think it's an honest answer if you get that. So I think if we, even if it's just small steps, but those small steps that people take are something that becomes a longer term thing, that's how we can really make a change. And the other thing I'm trying to influence, like, and tourism is a good example for that. So I think you often, let's use sustainability. I think it's difficult to find a different word for it. I think where it often comes down to, there's just no expertise there. It's just simple, like the people who are doing those jobs at the moment, they haven't, they just don't have the skills, the expertise to make changes. And this is where I kind of see myself coming in saying, look, I can give you the right advice here, how to make changes. And hopefully that creates a different kind of tourism further down the line. But the other thing is also those things are not going to happen in a 1 to 3 year window, you know, and it's the same with the bike industry. The bike industry is not going to change in 1 or 2 years' time. You know, I think we need to allow ourselves a longer time frame to make those choices, and that's crucial as well. So if you just judge things after a year, okay, you can see progress after a year, that's important. But the real changes are further down the line, and that's something I think which is a bit of a critique I often see. People don't think in those long-term time frames. They look at KPIs, they look at very short-lived measures, and if something doesn't deliver, it's unsuccessful. And then if you look at things further down the line, a couple of years further down the line, actually the change is coming, and this is important to highlight. So I think if we can change that mindset a little bit, that's possibly the most important thing along the journey.
We're going to talk a little bit next about your role as a filmmaker, but I had a light bulb moment there when you were talking about sustainability. 3 years ago, you did a film project with Mark Beaumont where he was trying to ride off-road the whole length of the UK, and you were his filmmaker, but you did the whole thing in a sustainable manner, which involved using a bus, carrying all your camera kit, riding in basically the same distance that Mark did, but you're carrying a 20-kilo pack full of camera kit and drone and all the rest of it. And nobody else does that. So your thing a minute ago where you made a comment about normally we make a film in the cycling industry and there'll be 3 or 4 support vehicles. And it's absolutely true. It's not a sustainable, eco-friendly way of doing it, but you proved it was possible. What did you do it to see if it was possible, or did you want to show that this is how we should try and do things in the future?
So again, I think I knew when I pitched, and it was actually a project I did with Shimano. So I think convincing a big company like Shimano that this is possibly a different way of doing things was a challenge. But also credit to Shimano, they bought it, you know, and they kind of bought into the project. I knew it was possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't have approached someone like Mark. Do I think it's a way like everything should be produced? Absolutely not. You know, sometimes it does come with its concessions as well. You know, I think you need someone who's incredibly fit. You know, you're talking about a round the world cyclist following another round the world cyclist. You know, and I think. But I also think, and this is the thing which is important, it was a different film. It was a different product. It wasn't the polished film you could have done with a whole crew and whatever. But that wouldn't have been possible to follow a race anyway. I guess my big advantage to all of this is I'm still racing. I'm an ultra endurance racer as much as I am a content creator in some shape or form. So I know the two sides of the story, and I always think like it's great because you know you need to, in order to make any film, you need to understand the subject. You need to be able to almost know what they're thinking in a certain situation. Because always what makes a good film is a bit of drama as well. You know, you can't just flatline a story and everything's good and nice. It isn't. You know, it's the same with cycling around the world. It's not a walk in the park. Absolutely not. There's some high and low moments. So I was very confident I could do it, because you also need that confidence along the way. It was absolutely not easy. And I knew after the first day was such a big learning curve where I kind of said, look, I really need to change how I approach this. This is like the way I had set it in my mind wasn't working. So I was kind of like, what? How can I make it happen? But I think this is the thing which is so universal. Like this is what I learned on my round the world trip. You know, you just if something's not working, change it, and make that change quickly. Because the worst thing is to dwell on something that's not working and getting miserable about it and getting resentful about it. That's where all the things fall apart. And it was great because I think if you look at the film, if you look at the final result, is actually a film that takes the viewer much more into the inside of the race than you could have done otherwise with an external crew. Because by the time I was talking about changing things, So I basically then treated myself as being just another rider in the race, but having the advantage to jump on a train or on a bus where I needed to get ahead of people. But after a couple of days, people who were racing actually treated me like they weren't seeing me as a filmmaker. Like, I had my camera, but that was not a thing. They saw me as just another person in that pack of people riding from Land's End to John O'Groats. And that made a difference, because you get much better if you look at all my films, one thing I do not like if people act in front of the camera.
Okay.
You know, one thing about ultracycling is it's very raw. It's sometimes a bit painful for people to watch afterwards as well, because they go through all sets of emotions.
Yeah.
But I think that's important. Let's not sugarcoat that. And someone riding 2,000 kilometers across the UK in the fastest possible time is not a walk in the park.
No.
You know, and that's what you get. So if you want that, I think that method is a good way ahead. And this is where e-bikes come in as well, because you now got bikes that can do long distances with a battery attached to them, and you can follow those races. So this is the kind of thing. But there'll also be, I've filmed a commercial where I was part of the commercial, and we had a crew of 10.
Okay.
and that's also a valid way of working. I think we just need to find the right balance, is to kind of understand if we want to. And I think in the end of the day, I do think that those more raw stories on the rider, I do think that's what people are more looking for to inspire themselves, because it is, any marketing is us telling someone to buy a product. That's just what it is. That's never going to change. It's just kind of but I think if we can do that, I think those kind of films give people a much more authentic experience, and I think they can see themselves much more in that, and kind of go actually, this could be me. And GB Duo is a prime example. It goes to some amazing places. But there's a stretch of 150 kilometers in Scotland. Even if you have a Land Rover, you won't get in there. Not possible. That's it. And it's the same on the Silk Road Mountain Race, the Atlas Mountain Race. There are thankfully places in the world that are too remote to get to by any other means. And I think if we can highlight those places, wonderful.
Great. We're going to jump sideways slightly and talk about bikes for a minute. You're everybody over the course of their cycling history, we've probably all had different ones, and you've had a single speed 29er, you've had a full suspension 26-inch wheeled bike, you've ridden all sorts of others, but at the minute you're on something that's quite unique. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the bike that you've got with you in Norway, and why did you choose the bike that you've taken out there?
It's a mouthful. An e-cargo fat bike.
Yeah,
That's
it's pretty niche, isn't it? A niche of a niche.
It's pretty niche. It's a long tail cargo bike. So people who are not into that thing, long tail basically means that you've got a longer tail than any other bike. So that's where you can put bigger panniers, so it's got more baggage room. It's got a motor, which makes sense because it's heavy. It weighs 37 kilograms, so that's not a light bike. And it's got fat tires, because
how
I do
fat's
think
fat?
that 27.5 inches by 4 inches. I don't know what, for European listeners, what that is. It's
I think
wide.
most mountain bikers will know a 4-inch tire is huge. It's probably double the size of a standard mountain bike tire.
That's big.
Yeah, it's double this. Yeah,
Huge.
double the size of a standard mountain bike tire. What that means, you have to work a little bit harder, but it also makes trails a bit more accessible. I think, especially if you've got loads, and this is I just think it's a very universal bike. Of course, it's not a bike you would race in a gravel race or any sort of stuff, but it's never been designed for that anyway. It's designed by someone who lives in the forest in Finland, and you can totally tell why that bike came about. And I think for me, I've done a number of cargo bike adventures recently, because I do think it's they're incredibly useful, and I think for years and years and this is coming back to finding alternatives for people to use cars less often. don't see the need. There's a total sense of stopping all of that use. But I think if you look at 5-kilometer journeys, most impactful journeys on cars for the climate, you can substitute a lot of those journeys with cargo bikes. You can go shopping. You can haul. I've hauled all sorts of things. So in preparation for the trip, literally. So what I did over the last couple of weeks is just to kind of understand a little bit how this heavy cargo bike handles in certain conditions, because that's the kind of thing, it is not as with weight come a few concessions in terms of riding. I don't want to fall underneath that bike, because 40 kilos on myself is not pleasant.
Or lifting it over a wall or something. It is a logistical.
It's not going to happen, I think, unless you've got a crane next to it.
Yeah.
But basically, so one thing I did, for example, and this is all coming about kind of more by accident than by choice, is like there was this pile of firewood sitting on the field, and there's some like logs which are totally usable. So we've asked the farmer if we can get some of those logs and saw them down and use them as firewood, and he said, yeah, cool, that's fine. So basically used that bike and hauled those logs over the field in the snow.
Very
and then
cool.
sold them down. We ended up with a lot of firewood. So
there's a little clip on your social media, isn't there, of you towing this enormous tree behind you? So we'll put a link in the show notes afterwards. But it's good. It's worth looking at.
And went shopping yesterday, like a day where we didn't move the car because it was just too, even with proper winter tires, whatever, I just didn't see there's any point in driving because everything's going to be clogged up on the roads. Used the car to go shopping. It's 140 liters. You can fit a whole shopping trolley onto that bike. That is enough. You don't have to go any further than that. And I think this is the thing. I often and for bike packing as well. I do think that for years and years the mantra where bike packing and gravel riding has been influenced by is to take as little as possible. And to go as light as possible, which is fine, and that hits home with some people in the audience. But I do think the majority of people, especially if they go on holiday, you know what? They like to sit on a chair on the beach. They like to take some comfort items. They actually like to use a towel, which is a towel and not just a washing up cloth, like a cloth and those sort of things. And I did a trip with Jenny Graham in May on those bikes, and we literally took all the stuff we would never take on a bike packing trip, and we had a great time.
You made a very cool video about it. I remember you had horrible weather, didn't you? But then you could take lots of wet weather gear.
And I think this is the thing. This is the thing about bikes. I think and this is the beauty about bikes. At the same time, I still ride my 1970s single speed with 28mm tires, which is super light. There's nothing on there to increase the weight. And I love my gravel bike with GRX as well. It's great. Di2 has a lot of good uses, and this is the kind of thing. So I'm excited about this trip. As I said, like for a winter trip, one thing I always try to tell people, and I kind of try to apply the same. So those trips, there's a certain risk involved in it. There's like being stuck in the snow somewhere at -25 is not pleasant, and it can become potentially very dangerous. And I think there's one side of people who kind of tell, like, why do you do those things? Like, this is, why do you risk it? And I think that's my personality, and I love doing those things. And other people jump off cliffs and race fast cars and whatever. And I think a certain personality trait sits in me as well. And I also do think I've got a bit of an addictive personality as well. So if I do something, it's very easy to get sucked into it. But I think you can decrease that risk by really understanding. So what I've done over the so I went skiing on the weekends at -20 degrees, just to kind of see how my body reacts to the temperature, and it was fine. It's just like, but a lot of those trips and any activity is about mindset. So your body is one factor, but I think if you approach things, and that's kind of coming back to the film I talked about, GB Duo, you can't go into those projects and say, oh, I'm not sure if I can do it. That's not the right attitude. It's also going to an ultra race. I think the worst possible thing you can do is to go to an ultra race without wanting to finish.
Okay.
You know, you can scratch halfway through. That's totally fine. That's legit. But I think if you stand at the start line, I think your imperative should be, I want to finish this. You know, I don't want to finish it by any means possible and kind of totally wreck myself physically or mentally or whatever. That's not the point. But I think at the start of the race, by the moment you stand at the start line, your incentive should be to finish. And that's the same with the round the world trip. I never publicly touted it out there saying I'm going to become a person to cycle around on a single speed bike. I was possibly a bit more careful with statements about that trip. But when I left Portobello Beach on that morning, I kind of, my intention was to finish in Edinburgh, coming back after a year on a bicycle and no other mates. And it's the same with that trip in Norway. So I've kind of spent kind of a thing and yeah, excited about it. I think it's kind of shifting I think it hopefully shifts people's perception of those bikes as well. You know, I think cargo bikes are very, very capable. And this particular one, it's got 2 batteries, it's got wide tires, it can handle a lot of tricky terrain actually. I've tested it in various conditions over the last 6 to 8 months. I've ridden that bike on a longer trip in Quebec. And it's totally fine. It's a bit like testing, you know, when they test electric cars or trucks. I've just seen they've tested a Renault truck in minus 30 degrees in Finland.
Okay.
And it actually outperformed the petrol or the diesel powered trucks. And, you know, for me, in a sense, is like, if I can test this bike in those pretty interesting conditions, you know, that's possibly the ultimate test for the bike.
Yeah.
But it's also creating some, you know, some content which is a bit of a novelty, something that will hopefully inspire people. And yeah, let's see how it goes. I'm not sure what the outcome's going to be.
Great. Now we've taken up a lot of your time, and we've taken up probably a lot of our audience listeners' time as well. So we're going to round things off. But we always finish with the same question, and I expect I know the answer to this already. If we were to put you on a desert island somewhere and limit you to one bike to take with you, what would it be and why?
I think it would be my single speed.
Oh, okay. Not what I was expecting. I thought you were going to say the cargo bike. Right. So simplicity would win.
I would presume a desert island, possibly a place where there might not be any electricity whatsoever. So I think it's that one bike, which is the simplicity of having a bike, being able to get to places. Yeah, I think it's the kind of thing, you know. I'm really grateful that I got into single speed riding at some stage in my life, because it has added such a lot of positives to my life. So I would take that.
Great.
Well, thank you, Markus. It's been a great hour with you. So,
really inspirational, isn't it?
It really is.
Lots of good,
really is.
lots of good things in there. The positive attitude, I think, if everybody could take that away, we'll all benefit.
Yeah.
And starting something with the aim of, I am going to finish this, and I'm going to get there. That's a really good motto or a metaphor for life.
Yeah, and I think the where idealism and realism, meets, it's something that I also take with me, because it's like. Everybody wants to be living in a perfect world, but baby steps. And if we can make it a little bit better of a place, then we're ignoring things is not an option. But trying to change everything overnight is also impossible. So, thank you for thank you for sharing your vision and your ideas and your adventures. So
my pleasure.
Well,
we look forward to seeing the film of your wintry cargo bike trip when it's ready.
Absolutely. Well, let's round things off. Thank you for joining us in this month's edition of Gravel Union Talks. If you have any suggestions for guests or topics you would like us to feature in future shows, then please post a comment on our Insta, Facebook, or get in touch by email, info@gravelunion.cc. Olly will be on the other end. You know, we're flat organization. So if you want to reach out to Olly, just send us an email, info@gravelunion.cc. Please like and star us on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure to leave your hopefully positive remarks. Don't forget, if you like what you've heard in this episode, there's loads more great stories, features, news pieces, and all the latest gravel event information over at gravelunion.cc website. Special thanks for Martijn for our jingles and music, and Ruben for editing the show. And especially to you listeners for bearing with us in this long episode of Gravel Union Talks, and hope to see you again and for the next episode of Gravel Union Talks. Cheers everybody.